Hutcheson of Seed Consultants, and we're here today in Kosciuszko County, just outside of Warsaw. I'm going to take a look at some fields, a corn and a soybean field, take a look at the early growth and development, dig up a few plants and take some stand counts. But in this area, there's some planting been going on the past couple of days, some replanting. A lot of progress was made towards the end of April, and then there's been a pattern of cooler, wet weather. And so guys are getting back in the field. We do have fields like this that were planted around April 25th that are okay, but then some other fields didn't survive the wet conditions, and so there is some replant going on currently in this area. We'll dig up a few plants and take a look at the early root development, look for issues like seedling diseases, early pest pressure, and try to take a couple stand counts to determine what kind of stand we have. We're going to dig up a plant here, take a look at the early root system. This corn was planted at about 1.5 to 2 inch planting depth. You can see the early development of the root system. Looks very healthy, nice color. You can see the seed there, about 1.5 inches below where the surface was, the surface of the soil. The radical root come out near the tip of the seed, and you can see the first nodal root system forming, which would be about 1 inch below the soil surface. Some diseases we normally look for this time of year, especially can be a problem, one is Pythium. We're not seeing any of that in this field, but that can be an issue in the early development of the seedling and cause reduced stands and death of plants. You want to dig up these plants and look for discolored roots, look like darker brown type lesions and roots that look like they may be dying or rotting. But as you can see here, this plant is healthy, no disease concerns with it. And as we walked across this field, no sign of seedling diseases yet either. One issue we've seen in this area, we aren't seeing it in this field, but in some of the heavier, more clay type soils, is soil crusting, especially where tillage was performed this spring. And then there were heavy pounding rains. We're seeing some soil crusting. Even though the seed is viable and still trying to grow, the coleoptile is having trouble coming up through that crust, and so we're digging up some seed in those fields and seeing some corkscrewing and some deformed seedlings, and I think some of the crusts are just too hard for the seedling to emerge. So in those cases where we have a crust, we need to walk our fields and determine what kind of stand we have. If there's variable emergence or very poor stands, we probably need to consider replanting once we assess those stands and walk a large part of the field, making multiple stand counts. One concern this time of year, as we get into mid to late May, is planting date. It's a pretty widely known fact that once you get past about the 15th of May, you lose 1% of your yield potential for corn for each day that you're delayed. The other concern is that if conditions are a little wet or marginal, you can do more damage by creating compaction if you're working your ground when it's too wet or planting when it's too wet. So it's important to keep in mind, even though it is getting a little bit later in May, that we want to take time and make sure field conditions are right before performing any field work. It's best to minimize tillage operations and other preparatory operations in order to get planting done in a timely manner and minimize the amount of planting delays going forward. It's pretty easy when you're in a cornfield to take a stand count. If you're on 30-inch rows, you need to measure 17 feet 5 inches, and that's 1/1000th of an acre. So then count the number of plants in that 17 feet 5 inches of row and multiply it by 1,000 to get your stand count. So we just took a stand count. In this particular row here, I counted 29 plants in that 17 feet 5 inch distance, and this field was planted at a population of 29,000. So we have very good emergence here and a uniform stand, and that's what we like to see. A mile down the road from the cornfield to scout a soybean field here and dug up a plant. We really haven't seen any disease issues in this field either. You can see a healthy root system. The cotyledons, which would have been the first leaves, and then trifoliate starting to form. As the plant continues to grow, you can see a healthy root system and even see some of the nitrogen fixing nodules starting to form as well. So developing pretty well, and there looks to be a really good stand here in this field and no disease issues. This field was planted on the 25th of April, so the seed would have been in the ground a few days before the cold, wet weather arrived, and that helped it a lot in terms of germination and getting off to a good start before going through stress. Other fields that were planted the 26th or 27th, right before the wet weather, didn't survive as well, and may have to be replanted or may have already been replanted. But this field appears to have a great stand. There's no disease issues we've found yet. This time of year you want to be walking when the beans first come out of the ground. Look for missing plants or plants that look like they're starting to die. Dig those up. Sometimes you can assess them by taking pictures and comparing them to field guides. Sometimes you may have to send them off to a lab to be analyzed. But this is a good time of year, right after emergence and this early growth, to walk these fields and get a good look at what kind of issues may be starting to appear. As we look forward to the next couple weeks of the growing season, it's important to continue to scout. As we wrap up planting, scout our fields, monitor emergence, look for disease issues in the early development of our seedlings. Keep an eye out for pests, including black cutworm, which there's a potential for damage with black cutworm. There's been reports of higher incidence of moths being caught in traps. We just want to keep an eye on our cornfields and make sure we're monitoring for that damage. Thanks for watching today, and we'll catch up with you sometime in June.